No, it's worthwhile staying. Okay. Yes. Okay, this will be a fairly private session. I don't know. It's the.
No, we have more people coming. They're lost, I know. Yeah. It's very difficult to find.
I also
It's
turned around
terrible.
like 3 times. Okay, so. Yes, I actually don't want to speak at the microphone at the moment.
No, we don't.
Let's. Okay, so the last few people are leaving. This is encouraging.
No, I think they're calling people in, no? We wanted to indicate.
That means Cecilia is taking the people up. Okay.
But should Cecilia come on stage also?
Well, if need be.
This is the UNEP Kigali? No.
So Rob.
Nice to meet you.
So we have. Okay, so we know that she's not coming. Rob still missing, and Mayor of Kigali is also missing. Sure. This is. Yeah, I mean, he's from.
I'm sitting on the other side and they said I'm wrong.
And you said.
Yeah. They sent me the wrong direction, sorry. Hi. It's so hot.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Eleanor Francois from Mobilize Your City.
Okay, nice to meet you. Hi, Rob.
Yes, come in here.
Hi, nice to meet you. Rob from UNEP. Everybody's confused.
Yeah, people are
I
lost.
don't know where it is. It's okay.
Terrible.
I know where it is now.
Is there other sessions are running late as well? Is that really now? We'll start, in a private sort of exchange, and then. Oh, things wrong.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, sure. Mobilize your city. Yeah. No, we're in Brussels actually. We have a part. Sorry, I don't have my cards anymore. I have the card, the general one. Don't have any other. Yes, exactly. And yeah, so we're this Eleanor, yes. Yeah. Eleanor, it's fine. Yeah, we're a partnership. We're based in Brussels, but we're a partnership between the EU, France, and Germany. And we work with cities in Africa, Asia, Latin America to support them to transition to sustainable urban mobility. But we do mostly mobility plans, so sustainable urban mobility plans, and yeah. So it's done by our implementing partners and from France and from Germany. So in France it's the AFD, the Agence Française de Développement, and in Germany GIZ. And so they're the one working with the cities to do the plans, and it takes about like 2 years to do a plan like that. And then we do, of course, some capacity building, advocacy next to it also. But yeah, that's like the heart of what we do is those plans in order to help the cities access finance. That's a bit the idea behind it. And now we have started to also support a little bit with implementation. And that's why we do some pilot projects, for instance. So that's why we're speaking here today. Some people are coming. Oliver?
Okay. Sorry, we're running a bit late with another session, so we're get on. We're just about. Okay, so we're. soon there will also be inputs from many of our partners. So maybe just a short introduction, and also to make sure that people are still having a chance to come in. We have some insights from our partner city of Kathmandu, hopefully also from our partner city in Kigali, and then some of our partners will share a few insights from our daily work in the Living Labs. All of this is sort of bringing together our work that we're doing in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in various transformative projects that we sort of bring together in the UN Habitat Collaborating Center that is called the Urban Living Lab Center, co-hosted by MIT, TU Berlin, and the Wuppertal Institute, and 30 other partner universities around the globe. What we're doing here is connecting our academic work with the ongoing living labs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, integrating case studies and master's theses in areas like urban planning, urban design, urban mobility, energy, and circular economy. And you're all very welcome to join this partnership. There are several opportunities that we can work on together, linking to our ongoing living labs, like developing case studies, design assignments, course concepts that directly link to our ongoing living labs, and then place students of our partner universities in ongoing living labs to work on specific assignments. And the way we do this is covering a number of thematic areas across mobility, education, digitalization, clean air, climate, planning, energy, and governance. A little bit as cross-cutting thematic themes that are then focusing on activities and urban living labs in our partner countries. And as a little illustration of some of that work, a few highlights from one of our most advanced ongoing project called SOLUTIONSplus, funded by the European Union. And also feel free to take pictures, just as evidence. So where were we? SOLUTIONSplus is one of the EU flagship projects in the field of the 2.0 partnership, which is a partnership between the European Union and European member states and industry, working on transformative action in sustainable mobility. This project is bringing together now actually 50 partners, 3 more have joined in the process, working together on sustainable mobility across the whole scope of e-mobility. So while we are focusing on electric mobility solutions, we are integrating this in the local and national policy measures, and across the 3 pillars of the whole program. So focusing on the development, the retrofitting, the remodeling of 2- and 3-wheelers in particular, but also minibuses, utility vans, taxis, and shared fleets. And then focusing on their operations. The mobility as a service application is sort of as a backbone that has been developed by our partners and being rolled out in several of our partner cities as a connecting element between formal and informal public transport, the various transport solutions. And then this also comes into the integration pillar, where we bring this back into policy and design guidelines for local and national governments, and in particular then also to business models that are ready for take-up. And the way we structure this is the way we structure most of our Living Lab projects, is across the 5 pillars of the co-development process. We start with informing partners on the various solutions that we're working on, inspiring with case studies that from others that have worked on similar solutions, initiating partnerships, implementing demonstrations, and then focusing on the scale-up and replication activities. And we do this in 9 different or 10 different cities in the SOLUTIONSplus program, and this also links to a sister program supported by the Global Environment Facility and implemented by the IEA and UNEP. And as we are nearing towards the end of our project, we've developed quite a few knowledge products on all the vehicle concepts, on the business models that have been developed, and we're now integrating all the regional and topical trainings into our partner hubs in the region so that they are being sustained long term. And similarly also the e-mobility toolbox is a repository for knowledge products across the topics that we're working on, and the capacity building activities are now being embedded into host institutions to continue, but there are still plenty of regional and e-learning activities that you can join from the SOLUTIONSplus project. And just to highlight a few of the activities that we're running in SOLUTIONSplus. So for example, the vehicle that you see here, the blue one, is a vehicle that has been developed in the context of SOLUTIONSplus. It has different shapes and formats as a utility vehicle for both passenger and freight transport, integrating a powertrain from a European partner, Valeo, but being home-based and developed in the Philippines by Tojo Motors, a local SME working on e-mobility solutions on this type of vehicle, and also slightly a bigger version of this. We've also worked on electric two-wheelers in the partner city of Hanoi. I'll hold off with Kathmandu because we have Kathmandu in the room, so I'll let Bhushan talk about this in a minute, but also working here on e-mobility solutions in smaller and bigger sized public transport vehicles. In Latin America, we focus quite a bit on electric cargo bikes for different use cases in Montevideo and Quito, redeveloping the vehicles that have been developed by partner startups and developing it further with regard to the vehicle, its concept and the use cases, but then also developing an electric logistics vehicle for last mile connectivity on that front as well. In Kigali and Dar es Salaam, we've worked on two-wheelers in the form of e-bikes and in Dar es Salaam, and e-moto taxis in Kigali, and now then also redeveloping electric three-wheelers for Dar es Salaam for the last mile connectivity to the bus rapid transit system and a bike sharing system in Kigali. So practical solutions that have also informed our European partner cities, Hamburg and Madrid. So whereas Hamburg is working on last mile connectivity with electric kick scooters, in this case sort of trying to reinvent the wheel there a little bit and making it a useful use case with these kinds of vehicles where they connect to the metro system in the outskirts of Hamburg. And in Madrid, we've been working with a public transport operator on a high-speed charging solution that can boost the rollout of the e-bus systems in Madrid. So plenty of learnings from this project that we are now going to digest in various knowledge products so that we can help scaling them up. And that will also be part of the discussion later on when we have filled the room even more. Know what we've done wrong. But that's fine. So here are a few insights from SOLUTIONSplus and some practical examples from the Living Labs here. And now back to, our insights from our partners. So how about we start with you, Bhushan, just for a few insights on a case from a public transport operator. Why don't you join us over here?
Shall I sit here?
And
yes,
soon there'll be more people up here. Maybe I should have set the step. Thank you, Oliver. Too bad there are too many people, but still, it's always a good thing to talk e-mobility, even if it's with a small crowd. I'm Bhushan Tuladar. I'm with Saja Yatayat, which is basically a public transport cooperative. So it's not a private nor a public sector initiative. It's a cooperative. So we've got government coming in with a majority of the shareholding, but then we have individuals like myself. I'm a shareholder, and I was elected as a board member, and that's why I'm there. And as a board member, because I have some interest in electric mobility, they have asked me to lead the electric mobility program, and that's so recently we got 40 e-buses that are now operating in Kathmandu. And with SOLUTIONSplus, what we were doing was trying to introduce a retrofitting of an old diesel bus to electric, and we're still working on it. Hasn't happened fully yet. And then also working on capacity building and also engaging with private sector to build some of these, what he just quickly talked about, a modification of a electric three-wheeler, Safa Tempo, and also a four-wheeler. So this is something that we started a couple of years ago. In fact, just as COVID was starting, we were starting our project, and that hit us pretty bad, particularly for a public transport operator, right? So we, like I said, we're a cooperative, but we don't have funds coming from the government, and also we have to survive. So on one hand, with COVID, as we all know, public transport went down the drain in most parts of the world, not all. But public transport operators were suffering, and in the meantime, trying to do something innovative was a challenge. But in spite of that, I think there has been some good work that has been done. And overall, some of the learnings is, the concept of a learning lab, urban lab, is important. It's important for institutions like us to actually be able to, work in a lab, almost like play with some of the innovations that are shown in places like COP and so on. And they look great in Dubai. They may not work as planned in Kathmandu. The Kathmandu context is very different from Dubai or Europe, for that matter. So in that context, to see if technologies and systems can be adapted to the local context is important. And in that process, to have a participatory design process whereby locals are involved in this, and while designing it, they learn this, so the capacity building happens. And then there's this, what we call the lean experimentation. So it's not a very highly technical academic exercise, but it's experiments. And then we link it with policy and scale it up. So even, for example, the conversion of a diesel bus to electric, right? So for a country like Nepal, we thought that was important. We don't have an electric bus industry of our own. Electric buses, like I said, we did buy 40 buses, but they came at a very high cost for us, about three times the cost of a diesel bus. And we feel that there's, if we can take some of our local buses and convert it, might work. But at the same time, that will also help us build capacity. So while doing that, there's also a challenge of local legislation. So local legislation doesn't allow conversion of an old bus that is from a certain technology to a new bus, right? So we've been working with the government on that. Now they have formed a committee, and we're engaged in that committee to come up with standards to do that. So that is also part of this process, learning process. So there's been a lot of challenges. Some beyond our control. B, some within trying to introduce innovations in a developing country. Technical innovations is always a challenge. Trust and from the government and so on. Although we are, like I said, big 99% is owned by the government, by local governments of Kathmandu, Lalitpur, as well as federal government. It's still a challenge to get that going. So in spite of the challenges, we need to, I think it's a good approach. And that really means that we need to be a little patient. So it's not going to happen overnight. And something that is needed, but it's going to take time. And I think what we have done in Kathmandu, we're quite proud of that. And we're looking forward to more innovations in the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Bhushan. Much appreciated. Maybe I should hand over to Eleonore to yes, sorry.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'm Eleonore François Jacobs, and I work for Mobilize Your City Partnership. Maybe we first go with Rob. So we have with us Rob De Jong, who is working for UN Environment, and we wanted to hear a little bit about scaling up and replication of these living labs. So please welcome.
Or I can go
Because
down and you can come down.
Actually, there is a live stream, so if you can please come on
Oh,
stage.
there is a live stream. Okay.
Otherwise,
I don't want to change the balance.
I'll come down to make balance it, although I'm a little bit heavier, I think.
Although actually we do have an online audience as well. So yes, there is a live stream.
Okay. So, some experiences from my side on maybe a couple of words. So, I work for UNEP. I'm heading the Sustainable Mobility Unit at UNEP, based at its headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. We work together with a lot of partners. Oliver gave the example of the SOLUTIONSplus, which is a project that we are part of. As he mentioned, there are 50 plus members. But we're also working with other partnerships on electric mobility, on walking and cycling. And so some reflections of those partnerships that we're working on in the context of the Living Labs concept. I think it's very important for developing countries to still find out what works locally. We did a pilot in Kenya, maybe naively, I don't know, bring in motorcycles, electric motorcycles from China, and drive them around in Kenya, and then find out Kenya has its own specific requirements for motorcycles. In China, they have 1, maybe 2 persons. In Kenya, they have 4 persons and a bunch of chickens. In Kenya, there are big potholes. In China, they're not. So, in other words, there's a lot of need still today to see what works in a specific operating environment. And so, trying things out to see what can and cannot work remains, I think, a core responsibility, a core activity that we are engaged in, and looking at some of you also. When we look at the introduction of low carbon and specific electric mobility, we normally find there are 4 challenges. There's a challenge of lack of standards and policy. There's a challenge of lack of finance. There's a challenge of lack of products. I just mentioned the example. But most of all, there's lack of awareness. And that's cross-cutting for all of them. And so that means when we talk to decision makers, they say, oh, electric mobility, that is far ahead for us. Not realizing that electric mobility is actually simpler than internal combustion mobility. Not realizing that possibly it could work much better in their country, so they don't have to import so much foreign fuel. So the awareness is still key. And will remain for some time, I think, in many of the countries that we work. Then the second thing, thinking about, and this is a bit contradictory, I'm going to contradict myself. On one hand, we need to test how it works, especially in urban environments. On the other hand, and we also need to create awareness. On the other hand, we can't wait for pilots, because we need to leapfrog. For example, all over Africa, African cities are now building mass rapid transit system. The most affordable mass rapid transit system is a bus rapid transit system. There's about 10 cities now building those, and as it looks now, business as usual will be to introduce diesel buses in them. And once you introduce a diesel bus, you're locked in for the next 20 years at least. So if we would now start piloting, we could potentially miss a lot. So on one hand, yes, we need to still try out what works. On the other hand, we need to move on. And I think the concept, the way I understand it, of a living lab is trying something out, but not keeping trying something out. Because we have no time. It would be fantastic if we had all the time, you know, but there's something called climate change, and there's something called Paris Climate Agreement, and so we're in that situation. On one hand, we'd like to provide a really tailor-made, foolproof, tested solution. On the other hand, we don't wait for that. So there's a level of risk-taking that we need to consider. One way to approach this a little bit is to work in consortiums, where you bring the knowledge from others together. We don't know, others may know. We have not tried it there. You've tried it in Nepal with your electric buses. They were very expensive. Maybe we learned from that. So the solution, or one of the solutions on this issue of trying it out, what works, what can replicate, is to bring that knowledge better together. In the UN, we're not very good at that, and I would say all of us are not very good at that. We don't know enough what's happening with the introduction of electric buses in Nepal, where they are very expensive. Okay? So that's something we can improve, and working with this consortia, we can improve it. Another thing, and I'm done in a moment, so am I taking too much time?
We're good.
You just, and there are not so many behind me, I can see. So the other thing for us, generating knowledge, generating capacity, generating political support also has to do with socioeconomic issues, green jobs development. And so we can talk a lot about the need to electrify two-wheelers, but also if we talk about the need to set up an assembly capacity in Africa to produce them there, generating jobs, all of a sudden the politicians do get interested. Then the last thing I'd slot it down when thinking about coming here is we still need a lot of tools, but not the tools that we used to make 20 years ago. We need tools that show countries how they can finance the electric bus fleet. We need tools that support partners how they can calculate the environmental and economic benefits. We need tools that allow them to compare options. I would say much more active tools than passive tools. And I think in the UN we've been always very good to write down big reports, but that's not maybe the type of tools that the decision makers and the active operators in the cities need for information to move from a pilot to a much wider introduction of whatever it is at city level. Let me stop there. Hope that was useful.
Thank you very much. So I would like to follow also on this theme of scaling up and replicating, because as I said, I work for Mobilize Your City. So for those of us who don't know, we're a partnership between the European Union, the governments of France and Germany, and we work to support cities in Africa, Asia, Latin America to transition towards sustainable urban mobility. So we do that mainly through mobility planning. That's the core of our action. So we do at the city level sustainable urban mobility plans, and at the national level we also work to do national urban mobility policies or investment programs. So we don't do per se living labs, but we do a lot of pilot projects, and they have the same spirits of testing ideas and also share some of the principles, like taking on a collaborative approach, having a shared vision, multi-stakeholder participation, these sort of things. And of course, we work on scaling and on making sure that this being replicated elsewhere. So why do we do pilot projects? It's because, so I was saying that we work mostly on mobility planning, but these plans that we work on take a lot of time to be developed and then an even longer time to be implemented. And sometimes pilot projects have become a way for us to support the implementation of the SOMs, but also to help us bridge that time between the moment that a local government decides to take on the topic of mobility and the time that there will be actual implementation of the plans, so to keep this momentum. And so we've decided to focus on 3 priority topics for these types of pilot projects, and these are governance, active modes, and paratransit. And we decided to focus on these 3 topics because there were 3 topics on which we noticed there was an implementation gap. So while the mobility plans that we are developing are actually helping produce a sort of leverage effect to access finance and to ensure implementation, there are some thematic areas that are more difficult to implement, and the 3 that I named are 3 key ones if we want to actually make sure that the transition is done completely towards sustainable urban mobility. So I was talking about how pilot projects are for us a way to ensure continued support between the planning phase and major project implementation like a BRT or this kind of large infrastructure, but they also help prepare the ground for this infrastructure. Especially when we talk about governance, for instance, we know that this type of large infrastructure project cannot be successful without strong institutions. So working before the implementation of these infrastructure on pilot projects to strengthen institutions is a way for us to ensure actually the success of the broader implementation. And then we also worked on the integration of paratransit, and that's an essential topic to ensure the success again of like projects like a BRT. There have been sadly some examples in the past of these large projects that have failed because they forgot to integrate paratransit, which seems really such an obvious thing to do when you work in cities where paratransit is actually the main form of public transport in place, and it must be integrated to make sure that all of these people working in this sector are part of the change and the transition is done in a just way. We also use pilot projects to keep the momentum and also to gain some buy-in on the topic of sustainable mobility. So that's what I was saying about like how, you know, these plans take a really long time, and sometimes it's difficult for local governments to sell this politically because it seems very abstract, and in the end you get a plan and it's not yet even implemented. And so to really show the efforts and to keep the momentum going, pilot projects, for instance, on active modes, tactical urbanism, these sort of things can be a way to show also that the government is involved on that topic and wants to create change, even if there is some longer term projects that are going on. We've had an example, for instance, in secondary cities in Senegal, where there wasn't yet the financing available for larger infrastructure, but at least to gain some buy-in on this topic, we did some pilot projects that is then going to help while waiting for larger projects to come in. We also do pilot projects to bring, to add on value to major projects, and we had the example in Puebla where a BRT has been developed, and there was a pilot project, for instance, to add biking parking on one of the stations of the BRT. So these sort of smaller projects that can be added on to a broader one, and for topics like active modes, walking and cycling, it can be really the way to actually make sure that it is included in those projects. And so, yeah, I was talking about how we do scaling and replication. Of course, as a global partnership, this is really at the heart of what we try to do, is take on projects that have been successful in one place, learn from them, and make sure they can be replicated elsewhere. But also in one city, when something has been completed and has been successful, making sure that it can be replicated within the same country and scaled up. And so one aspect of it is scaling up by working across different levels of government. And we've had this example in Costa Rica. They built a cycling path between the city of Curitiba and Monte de Oca. And by doing so, they had to revise the national design guidelines for building roads. And this had the effect that it was then included in national design guidelines, which means that now, from now on, any other city that is going to use these guidelines now have some reference on including cycling in this. They also had to create a team specialized on the topic. So at the national level, there was some change, which is going to help have a sort of trickle-down effect on other cities in the region at least, and probably nationally. We had different examples also in Santo Domingo, for instance, in Dominican Republic, or in Senegal, in Dakar, where the institution that developed the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan was actually at the local level. So even though they were working on the capital city, because the institution was a national institution, it had the effect that, of course, they can now, again, replicate the same kind of projects in other cities. And this is something that we're seeing actually happen because these institutions take on a national role and a local one. So they're playing on two levels. And this sort of integration, I think we cannot underestimate the power of working across levels. And I mean, at this COP, I think a lot of this has been addressed already, but like really bringing local governments, regional governments to also work with national governments help transform much faster the mobility systems. And then we also work with communities of practice. So we have regional communities of practice where it's a place really to share these good practices, and we organize meetings regularly. We have online exchange. We also do some capitalization documents, really to try and extract these learnings and allow more replication. And then lastly, of course, scaling up is also a matter of finance. And that's one of the key components that we work on at Mobilize Your City. We help our member cities and countries to access finance through mobility planning. And we're happy to see that mobility plans actually help prepare bankable projects, and there is this leverage effect that I was talking about. We do see that cities access more easily funding for implementation of the plan, and so we're convinced now to do more of that. But as I said, we need to complement this effect still on some of the topics that are more difficult to finance and maybe also more difficult to address in general. So I was talking of governance and paratransit reform. These are really particularly sensitive topics that sometimes the local governments are not really equipped to address, and so that's why we work also on capacity building on these topics and on creating additional tools and methodologies, like you were saying, just to allow them to be able to take action. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Much appreciated. And yes, indeed, we talked about pilot projects quite a bit. And Busha and I wondered if you wanted to join us just for, a little bit of chit chat. We're a small and private group here today, but indeed, the pilot projects are playing a big role. And also, Rob, you mentioned that they are not meant to hold us up. But I'm just wondering because one of the pilot projects that we jumped on in Kathmandu is like a 30-year-old pilot project, the Safa Tempos, right? That it was a great start, but then at some point it was sort of left alone, right? And this is one of the key things that we would like to avoid with that urban living lab approach, where we are embedding institutional knowledge into local organizations. So that's the partner universities that continue and maintain that institutional knowledge, and then of course rejuvenate. For example, so the Safa Tempos, the electric three-wheelers that were introduced in the late 90s in Kathmandu, there was a great pilot project, but of course it needed continuous scale up and support. And that's again what we want to do. We don't want to hold up with pilot projects, rather the opposite. We would like to unleash more of the scale up activities and the transformative projects through those pilot activities that are demonstrating that it can work. Because in some of the cases where we are working on electric buses, for example, it would be the first one to enter. For example, now with little bit support, a lot support also from others, like the Green Climate Fund in Kigali, 2 electric buses have entered Rwanda and are now roaming in Kigali to showcase that it can work and that there is some room for improvement. Indeed, Bhushan, join us for that. So. And here I'm wondering, maybe Rob, we're starting with you, on where do you see the barriers but also the opportunities for going from that demonstration, from the pilot to the more transformative action? Where do you see the barriers and maybe then ways to overcome those?
I think first we need to get rid of the word pilot project.
I totally agree. We talk about demonstrations here anyway. Yeah.
And then I think we should call them something like I don't know, prepare the ground project, first phase project, preparatory project, so that we see those projects as the first phase to something wider. Well, that means that you also, but we also need to stop designing pilot projects like we have been doing maybe altogether in the past, which is a beginning and an end, and need to focus much more on the upscaling, replicability, and sustainability. And that means that the pilot project should already look at overcoming the barriers for upscaling as part of the pilot project. So it's not like, let's bring one electric bus somewhere, try it out, see how it works, write down a report and go home. But rather, let's do one bus, and when we are doing this, design the next phase for the next 100. And overcome the barriers for the next 100. Or at least come with a proposition to the international community that, for example, is bankable and implementable for the next 100. So we need to much better integrate into the pilot project the second phase. And it's going to be the responsibility of the pilot project to make sure there will be a second phase. Now, so what are the barriers to that, right? That's your question. I think there are very many, but let me think about the ones that I think are most important. Well, first to say that thinking that I just said is not always there. There's too much, let's finish, start a project, let's finish the project, let's report to the donors, we're done. So building into the project and upscaling as a standard and how to do it, I think is the first thing that needs to happen. Second, it needs to happen. We're now in a situation where we have quite some of these pilot projects ready to upskill, but they're not being upskilled. Why? If we go to the finances, they say we have so much money, but those projects are not ready to be financed in, because you obviously didn't design them with the finances in mind. We go to the projects that have put a lot of effort into designing a program that is now upscalable and say the finances don't want to finance us. So in this interesting situation where the finances are looking at, we don't have bankable projects, and those with the project says we have project but they don't want to finance them. That's because they don't connect. That's because they speak different language, because they have different requirements to get to go from 5 electric buses or 50 electric motorcycles to 5,000 electric motorcycles or 50 electric buses, a whole line. There's specific requirements for those that will put the financing in. The development banks, for example, it's my experience that those requirements are not completely understood and not completely integrated into the pilot project. So I think that's one thing we've learned. The same goes a little bit with technology. I said it before. There may not anybody interested to provide 50 electric buses in Togo, even though we have a fantastic project and the financing, but there may not be there may be no suppliers that are willing to set up shop to provide 50 buses to a city in Africa. So we need to look at procurement. We need to look at upscaling. The way what they did it in India is that there were very many cities who wanted to go to electric buses. The prices were very high because the numbers were very low, and then they combined them all together. And then they went, and then they got then they were 1/3 cheaper. And all of a sudden, the Volvos and the Scanias and the MANs and I don't know who were really to set up shop and to make a bid for them. So that's something we also need to, I think, build already in is skill. So let me stop with these 3 points, these 3 barriers that we need to tackle as we design. I don't know whether that makes sense or not.
Thanks, Rob. Much appreciated. And indeed, I mean, the pure availability of products, this is one of the bits at the moment that is really nerve-wracking, where there's so much willingness and so much opportunity, but in particular the buses, on the bus side of things, in particular in Africa, not there yet, but you know, on the 2 and 3 wheeler side we're getting better, but yeah, still lots to do. I mean, Bushan, you've experienced lots of barriers over the past decades in your work, so maybe a few insights from your side where you see the showstoppers and where we can like jump onto the next level.
Yeah, two things. First, let me start with the story of SOLUTIONSplus, right? So what happened? 1991, there was elections for the first time really after the democratic government came in Kathmandu, a new mayor, new deputy mayor came in, a young deputy mayor who had gone to US right after that, in 1991, late 1991 or 92, for a trip to visit Eugene, Oregon, which is basically a sister city. Now, one guy over there said, this is 1991, okay, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, said, Deputy Mayor, you've got all these very polluting three-wheelers, diesel three-wheelers running around Kathmandu. I can convert it to electric. The Deputy Mayor said, don't just talk to me about it. If you want to do it, come show it to me. So the guy got on the next plane, got to Kathmandu, and 1 year later, he had an electric three-wheeler up and running. The municipality then took the necessary steps to make sure that that was allowed to run, because legally, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to convert a vehicle. Even till today, you're not allowed to do it. But this is 31 years ago, 32 years ago. And then USAID at that time had a program, a small program, Asia Environment Partnership, which said, okay, one is not enough really to prove anything, so let's do a few more. So they did 7 electric SOLUTIONSplus. By 1995, they had 7 electric vehicles that had been converted and running on the streets.
Tuk-tuks.
Yes, tuk-tuks. And then they tried it for 6 months, and it operated 6 months, carried, hundreds of passengers every day. Each one carries 11 passengers plus a driver, so 12 of them. So it's quite a good thing. But then it didn't stop there. What they then did is called in the private sector and sold the 7 to a private sector. They did a bid. 2 companies bid, EVCO and NEVI. NEVI won, Nepal Electric Vehicle Industry. And that started the EV industry in Nepal, really, right? Then EVCO started making, okay, we didn't win that bid, but we started making it by ourselves. NEVI started making it by themselves as well. Then 7 went to 700, right? Now, today there are 700. But then what hasn't happened is that it kind of got stuck in 700, right? We've had 700 for the past 20 years or so. The technology upgrade that was needed didn't happen. These were lead acid batteries, the battery, technology needed upgrading, that didn't happen. The policy upgrading that was needed didn't happen. So what happened was the scaling up that Rob was talking about, right? To a certain extent with private sector engagement, and I think that is important. We cannot do it. The private sector has to be engaged, and the private sector did do a little bit of innovations. Now they've gone for lithium-ion batteries and all, but that was challenging. And then this whole thing about conversion being legal was still a challenge. The municipality managed to do it, right? But still a challenge. So, lesson. Number 1, how did this thing happen again? Number 1, local leadership. Okay, deputy mayor saying, let's do it, and then inviting an innovator to try it. So that was, urban lab that was happening in Kathmandu in 1991, 1992. An innovator tinkering with technology and making it done. 3, a development partner putting in a little bit of assistance, and then municipality using its muscles in whatever way to making it happen, policy, some policy changes. And the last thing, the 5th thing that happened was private sector scaling it up. That sequence of events, I think, needs to be repeated again and again. Local leadership, right? Private sector scaling it up. In between, we have a development partner and innovator working on these technologies. Okay? And for all of that, what is most important is that ownership. The local ownership has to be there. If it's something from outside, it's not going to just work. If it's just outside, yes, this also came from outside, but that local ownership and that whoever comes from outside has to try and build that ownership if it's not there yet. And that takes time, and that is, second thing that I would like to say. So the first thing is the private sector for scaling up. Second thing is that ownership. And the third thing that the technology, and I think Rob also said it, yes, there are motorcycles in China, but they don't work in the potholes of Nairobi. Same with us. There are beautiful buses in Europe, in China, but we have potholes, and most of these buses are low-floor buses, and they don't work. Even today, just last week, we had a board meeting, and we wanted to add some buses that was long-distance buses, and then several members of the board were saying, no, we should reconsider. We made a decision 5 years ago that we are no longer going to invest in diesel buses. Any new investment will be electric buses. But then the board members were saying, these buses aren't available for long-distance buses, the roads are bad, let's just go for diesel, it'll be cheaper. We stuck to our gun and said, no, we will not go back from our decision from 5 years ago. But still, it's not easy to get the products that are suitable for local conditions. So these are the things.
And I mean, sometimes we need to use tricks. So the upgraded traffic campers that we did within SOLUTIONSplus, we need to do them on the building of an old one that is already somewhere rotten, but it still has a license plate, so that allows us to use it. Otherwise, we would not be able to use it on the streets in Kathmandu.
You need to work your way around the local policies and guidelines and so on.
But I mean, the private sector element is one of the key bits, and that also gets onto your points, Rob, on what's afterlife of a pilot project or of a demonstration. And I agree that we should get rid of the whole pilot project terminology, because it's been burned in a while. So working on business models that can then be taken up by private sector partners, because that ensures also the sustainability on its own level. I wonder how that works with regards to the post-pilot project afterlife within Mobilizer City, if you were to be able to share a few insights on that, Ellen.
Yes, so I think the difference maybe with our projects is that our pilot projects are most of the time included in these longer planning processes. So it means there is already the vision of developing a broader concept for the city and looking at bigger projects. So in that sense, I think we're not in context where, we come in with a pilot project and then it's done and then nothing. It's usually something that is more added to these longer term projects with this idea of while we wait for what's coming, we can already start prepare the ground and so on. So in that sense, we don't have as much that challenge, that difficulty, and I think that's one probably positive aspect of having these mobility plans. However, I wanted maybe just to continue a little bit on what you were saying, because you were talking about the need for this local leadership, and I think this is really key. And we can see it in the project that we are working on. And not only do we need this local leadership, we also need the strong institutions with this. And we see, so of course, without the local leadership, even strong institutions don't suffice. You need both, really. But this has been something that has been a challenge for us, that sometimes we would want to be able to work on pilot projects and the institutions are not there or don't have the capacity to take on something like that. So most of our projects have actually, of the pilot projects, have been done in Latin America because of that, because there has been a longer tradition for local governments to work on urban transport. While, for instance, in Africa, we have cities where this is a much more recent theme in the local governments, and the need for capacity building in the institutions is much, much bigger. So this is something that I wanted to emphasize, because I think that's also one of the challenges for being able to actually do a pilot project that will be successful and will lead to something, is having the institutions that are strong enough. And we've had even the cases of, I think it was in Bogota, that they recently even reformed the local government so as to reflect their vision of mobility, so that it would really be embedded and work even better. And so this example of Costa Rica that I was mentioning, where they now built up a team that is working on biking and so on, it's really about that, having these pilot projects convert into the institutions themselves so that they can continue the work that is being done. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleonora, much appreciated. So maybe just on that last bit, on the local ownership, because that's something that we, of course, all try to empower. But so maybe we'll just do a little round of sharing thoughts on how, maybe Robert, I can start with you again, just from your perspective on UNEP's role on creating, nurturing, sustaining, enabling local ownership, and then how do you go about that you don't overpower with your ideas, but still throw in ideas that can then, go to to that level of local ownership that we need to get things started, or embed things.
Well, I think the way we have been working for years is never in a top-down way. The way we've been working in UNEP, supporting sustainable mobility, has always been working with local partners. You are aware that we work with many contracts, multiple partners in a country or city that we work, universities, NGOs, knowledge institutions. The problem is more, so local ownership is fantastic. The problem is more that there often is not always the capacity locally that you need. So it's not a matter of will I go through local partners or not, but more a matter is can I find the local partners that can achieve what the project is supposed to achieve. And that immediately comes then with a comment that I made earlier and a Living Labs comment. Then we have to create that capacity. We have to build that capacity so that these issues can be done locally. We've been involved in quite some countries in taking the first steps towards electric mobility. Many of these countries now have a vibrant local private sector. Now that's not only because of us, but I think we played a small role in it by trying to promote the knowledge sharing, the knowledge generation at local level, etc. So I think we all have a mission, or we have a responsibility to make sure that we build these local capacities. Because without it, we don't have the sustainability, that replicability. But that's easier said than done. Those are long-time commitments, building partnerships, and so that's a challenge we have nowadays. Again, we need to move faster than we can, and not all the countries that we work have the local capacity to build locally electric two-wheelers, for example, which you all want because we tell these politicians green job creation is important and this and that. So that's a challenge.
And I mean, this is of course where the two worlds are sometimes a little bit in conflict, where of course we do want to nurture a business environment and let them thrive, the ones that we have started with already. But then of course we're looking into the potential new ones and to make it as easy as possible for them. But for them to have an easy entry, we need to make it as easy as possible, in a way also taking away the competitive advantage of the players already in the market. So this is a little bit of a tricky situation where we are currently in, where we want to get the current businesses a competitive edge, but on the other hand making it easier for new businesses to come in. Bhushan, where do you see the home for the capacities so that we can try to get away from the standard development cooperation approach of external experts and international experts coming in, flying in, writing a feasibility study and disappear again, so that this is being created, developed, nurtured locally. So where do you see the home for that capacity?
I mean, ultimately the home has to be local, right? So because otherwise, even if it, a UNEP or a Wuppertal comes in and it spends 3-4 years, ultimately they will leave, right? Locally, yes, there are different actors there. There's government, there's NGOs, there's private sector, and there's universities and so on. Anyone could be, but at the same time, I agree that there is the capacity is lacking, and building that capacity would require a lot of patience, which may not be there for the external agency or for the funding agency, right? So for years, we have been talking about capacity building for decades in developing countries, whether that be through government or whether that be even in NGOs and so on. that is definitely lacking, and that is crux of the matter. I agree, right? When we say localization, and I think partly we also need to come halfway there, right? So when we talk about certain processes, like, you know, even in these negotiations, a lot of developing country representatives will complain about how, you know, GCF processes are very cumbersome and we can't handle it, or it's, you know, which is true to a large extent, right? So even if you want to follow the negotiations in COP or something, you really need a lot of capacity to do that. Even for someone from a developed country, or for a developing country, it becomes a lot more difficult to go through a GCF funding cycle, you know, and get that funds is very, very challenging for even that, a developed country organization. So in that sense, that processes needs to be a little bit more friendly towards local organizations. And how we do that, we need to work on that. I agree there are certain measures that are put there to, you know, reduce their fiscal fiduciary risks, reduce, you know, ensure that the processes are participatory and all that. That is all, yes, good, required. But still, how do you engage local groups, local communities, and get them to, you know, own this is really, if you want to do that, that project has to be localized. I mean, it's easier said than done, I know that, but at the same time, we need that patience to work on that.
I mean, a few takeaways and homework, like, you know, reflections are very helpful, and, you know, patience and ease of access, that's definitely something that is a good reflection also to many of the funding organizations where, I mean, you stress that some of the funding processes are way too difficult for local organizations to jump into it. There are formats, but they are still over complex. So I do wonder, I mean, you know, one way we do this, and what drove us to the creation of the Urban Living Lab Center was to empower local universities to be part of that, to be trained and have easier access to the knowledge products that we have, and also easier access to funding you know, in different organizations as well. I wonder how do you work with Mobilize the City with local organizations to ensure that local ownership?
Well, that's the first phase of any mobility plan, is really to find the right actors locally and to make sure everyone is engaged, so that it's not something external that is coming from outside the city, but really the city is leading the project, and that all the right actors are benefiting from the process itself of the mobility plan to gain in terms of capacity. And I think we've put now also a great accent on capacity building because we see the needs that are emerging also from the projects that are being done. And so we try to answer to these needs by developing the right tools, the right methodologies, and lately what we've added is that we've created training materials that we make available for anybody who wants to take on a training and replicate it somewhere. So this is also something that for instance, some universities have picked on, sometimes consultants, sometimes local authorities. We have different requests from different types of actors who want to access these training materials and are then able to deliver the trainings on the methodologies that we put forward, and it covers a very broad range of topics. It's available in many languages, and it's really with this idea of like openness and having this available and free to anyone. Maybe one thing that I wanted to come back on, if I may, you were talking about like the patience that's needed, and I agree with that. And at the same time, I think because of what you were saying also earlier about like how these pilot projects should not remain isolated pilot projects that just end there, we need also more ambition from the donors. You know, sometimes it feels like it's a little bit shy, if I may. Like they put there some finance for a pilot project because let's see, we're not sure, this topic is tricky, and you know, how do you address paratransit? Let's rather do something small because we don't want to end up with something that fails. But I think sometimes we need to be a little bit more like they're taking risks because these projects need to be done, and yes, they're tricky, but we need to try. And I think now there has been a lot of lessons learned, and we know mostly like how to address these things. And so yes, I agree that maybe we should stay away from the term pilot projects and encourage more like a first phase or preparatory phase for something else. But that would also be a call towards the donor to think that way and to think more ambitiously to what needs to be done.
Great, thanks. I do realize that Bhushan needs to leave in a minute. Well, we can do a little group photo in a minute. We can. It's just it's a shame that our friend the mayor of Kigali didn't manage to join us, because he could have also shared some of the perfect examples where in Rwanda and Kigali we almost have the perfect storm of what we wish every city of our partner cities to be, because we have started with several sectoral projects on energy, on mobility, on safety and urban planning. We have a lot of local ownership from the city of Kigali and the mayor, and now building a big capacity building hub at the University of Rwanda. So this is sort of where our ideal vision is going, and now we're bringing this all together in the sector link project here as well. So lots more homework for us to do. Let's go beyond the pilot projects, but I do want to use the opportunity to have a little group photo with the whole panel, and maybe Cecilia, you can also join us, Cecilia, from UN Habitat as well. And then we'll wrap up the session a bit earlier. That's also allowable. And
did you have a question? Sorry.
Questions?
oh yes, of course. Of course.
I see people
Then
like,
okay.
you're only
Then
looking at us.
I'll have to leave unless you have a question for me.
Then okay. Well,
Oh, you do have a question. Okay,
it's actually
I'll
for
stay.
you. Okay, Bhushan. Then yes, go for it.
So we work on mobility justice in general. So my question about the collective structure of your company or cooperative. I mean, how it is. It's good to learn about it because it could be a solution for other countries to learn from this, because the integration could be the integration of paratransit or informal mobility could be part of this structure at some point.
Maybe just to add on that, because you were also talking about that, you know, the pilot initiative started 30 years ago and policy still hasn't caught up. Is there any way that you feel that there's some ingredient that is missing that could really push policy or regulations to actually keep up with the innovation somehow?
Okay, one of the reasons that policies haven't picked up is that these past 30 years have been quite turbulent in terms of political history of Nepal, where we went through a civil war, we went through, you know, all kinds of things. So as a result, there's been a lot of changes in government transition and so on. And I just noticed Andre just walked in, and UN Habitat believes in working with local communities, local governments. And I think that is where the key is. Local government, if it is local governments formulating policies, it becomes quicker, particularly for urban services like transport and so on. And I think now we're seeing more empowered local governments, and that we are a little bit more hopeful on that. Now back to your question on the composition, what makes this, our company unique, is that we are cooperative. Now, according to a principle of a cooperative, what happens is, you know, I am an investor, right? I invested a little money. I really don't expect return in it. I've never gotten return in it. It's public transport. We never make money. The city of Kathmandu is an investor. The other cities are investors. We have mobilized that. Central government is an investor. But unlike a corporate company, your voting power doesn't depend on how much money you have invested. Every investor gets one vote, right? So that way we can control a little bit on who gets to the board. So that is important. It also builds ownership over a large section of society. Now we do need to work on our governance a little bit more, engage more people, but then what happens is every AGM, the general meeting that we have every year, we go through the, all governance practices, audit report, and so on, and all company shareholders, people like me, who sit and discuss, complain, whatever. But that is important. And for a cooperative, it's a mix, it's a hybrid between a public and a private ownership. And that's how we've, done it, in short.
Thanks. Thanks, Bhushan. Much appreciated. Any other questions for Bhushan? You have to leave. You'll find him tomorrow at the Nepal Pavilion as well for another session. You can do some advertisement here as well. It's at 9:30, right? 10:30.
10 o'clock, we're
10
expecting
o'clock,
at 9:30.
10 o'clock, so great. Thanks, Bhushan, for joining us. And we've also, any more questions for Rob or Eleanor?
If you have any more
Okay,
questions,
go
I'm there, but I have to run for another meeting, but sorry. Thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
You'll find Bhushan tomorrow at the Nepal Pavilion at 10 o'clock. Thanks. Thanks, Bhushan.
Were we just going to take the picture first before Bhushan goes?
Let's do that. So, Bhushan, before you leave,
Yes, I need to
you
go.
also, yeah.
I'm going to my next.
Bhushan, let's take one group picture. Should we have it there or should we have it? No, this one is the one, no? So let's. Just very quick.
I think, let the audience come too. Yeah, enough for
It seems to have been very hard to. Oh, Rob, join us quickly.
Rob.
Just one quick.
The audience should also come. Come on, you've been here. You've supported us.
Somebody's taking a picture.
Oh, we get the cup, the logo, yes.
Francesca. Can you take an auto picture? Run here and take a picture of yourself with timer.
Okay?
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
Thanks.
Hi, Andre. Nice meeting you. Okay. Good.